Freedom and choices are liberties millions have and will continue to die for. They're what defines who we are and what makes us human, but how do we really know if they're our decisions? Are we making choices for ourselves, and are our decisions derived from our roles in society or the culture we've been raised to accept as reality? These are some of the questions Silent Hill F asked the audience. Other than immersive sims where agency is often a narrative and meta-narrative tool, it's rare to play a game that questions who you are and whether you're in control of your actions. If you're wondering whether you should play this game, I wouldn't make a video this long just to hate on something. Despite a few issues we'll discuss later, I wholeheartedly believe this story, that's as relevant today as it was 60 years ago, is worth experiencing. Beyond its themes and interesting questions, the story kept me engaged from beginning to end. The biggest issue with discussing Silent Hill is most games live in Team Silent Shadow. Except for Shattered Memories, you'd be challenged to find anyone who's as enthralled with them as Team Silent's original work. The only Western Silent Hill game I've played was Bloober Team's Silent Hill 2 remake, and while I'm not as critical of that remake as others, I believe some of the nuance and tone from the original is missing. If you're curious about my full thoughts on the remake, I'll have a link to my video in the description. Silent Hill F, conversely, feels more tonally and spiritually aligned with Team Silent's original vision. To explain the significance of this, we need to discuss the entire plot, so consider this your spoiler warning. Most of our stories begin with development history, but this game is like a month old as of writing this video. There aren't exactly a ton of developer interviews, diaries, or other articles to go off, so let's talk about the mysterious NeoBards Entertainment and the development team. When Konami announced they were reviving the Silent Hill IP with several new projects, eyebrows rose when Bloober Team and NeoBards Entertainment's names were announced. Bloober Team, according to themselves, were making shitty games, and NeoBards Entertainment was viewed as a company responsible for remasters, a bit like Bluepoint if you're familiar with them. Capcom hired them in the past to work on the Devil May Cry HD Collection, Resident Evil Origins Collection, and the Dead Rising Deluxe Remaster. The reason I called them strange earlier is because finding what they did with Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, Marvel's Avengers, and Resident Evil 7 is borderline impossible. Because of this, it's hard to say whether they're a traditional developer or a video game consultant equivalent. Their website provides when they were founded, the experience they bring, and which games they've worked on, but never define what their specific scope of services are. One of the reasons I go over studios and people in my videos is to show that games aren't made in a vacuum and see how they got here in the first place. One of the most unique examples of this can be found with Creative Assembly's Alien Isolation. Going from strategy games to creating one of the most immersive horror games ever is an impressive accomplishment, to say the least. Based on their work for or with Capcom, NeoBards certainly has some experience in horror. That said, creating your own project from scratch is a far more ambitious endeavor than creating a remake where you have a blueprint to build from. And with their minimal experience creating games, I'm genuinely curious why Konami staffed them with creating a brand new Silent Hill game. We'll probably never know why, but Bloober Team called their game shitty, so never say never, I guess. Overseeing this project was first-time director Al Yang. Ryukishi 07 famously wrote the story, and the soundtrack was a collaborative effort between Kensuke Inage and Akira Yamaoka. The sole addition of Ryukishi 07 turned people's heads and created hype for this game before it even came out. Ryukishi 07 rose to gaming fame through his work on Higurashi and Umineko When They Cry, both of which I haven't played or read or whatever you call visual novel games. And after playing the game, I totally get the hype. I understand why everyone was so excited after fully experiencing the story. It took me a while to get all the endings and let the story marinate, but I'm glad that I did. Describing a game's graphics and overall presentation in 2025 is kind of hard, however. Games have looked good for a while now, so saying words like, "oh, look at how realistic this looks," doesn't carry the weight it used to. You don't need me to tell you that games have looked good for a while. Instead, let's focus on the attention to detail and atmosphere, the physics on loose clothing, watching hair move, the incredible volumetric fog, and the lighting are genuinely outstanding. And if you think all this stuff is boring, welcome to graphics in 2025. These small incremental upgrades are what often define how games look today. Although games have looked great for, nearly a decade at this point, I couldn't help but stand still and soak in the environment at times. Let's use the middle school as an example. Upon reaching the old annex hallway, I found myself staring at this mysterious fog with steps soaked in these crimson flowers as scarecrows hung from above. Your vision of the hallway is blurred by fog, and the scarecrows are practically threatening to attack. This small hallway is overflowing with tension and unrest with only one way forward. There's a benign sense of vulnerability as you cross the hallway and are greeted with this light shining on you. This unease begins to fade as Hanako opens the door with nothing behind it, And whether you're opening doors, exploring forests, or are just listening to ambient sounds, Silent Hill F has some mostly great audio as well. Listening to the sound of branches snapping as Hanako walks over them, her footsteps in the gravel, or weeds moving as you explore rice fields contributes to the overall immersion. And when we aren't exploring, there's some great audio during combat. Sound cues are some of the most underrated aspects of audio design. I think everyone loves them. There's a level of catharsis achieved when landing parries in Dark Souls, Royal Guards in Devil May Cry, headshots in shooters, and so on. Audio adds to the weight of combat, but it can't be understated just how invaluable sound cues are when creating a combat system. Rest assured, we will discuss combat extensively, but the sound cues for perfect dodges, counters, and critical strikes are outstanding. This is just a small thing I wanted to highlight and let developers know that they don't go unnoticed. Nevertheless, the combat audio does have room for improvement. One of the recurring issues bothering me was the positional audio for this game. For context, I use a pair of Sennheiser HD 569 headphones. Positional audio hasn't been a problem in the past, and it shouldn't be a problem here. Unfortunately, there were several times where I thought an enemy was behind me only to be in front of me to the right or left. The positional audio is probably the worst part of the game's overall presentation outside of some minor technical issues like the occasional frame pacing stutters. Technical problems, although important, can be resolved through patches, which is, kind of the ethos of 2025 gaming. I think if fans had to decide between foundational or technical issues, I'd wager we're taking technical problems every day of the week. Then again, Silent Hill F has plenty of foundational issues we'll talk about in depth later. Aside from the positional audio having room for improvement, Akira Yamaoka and Kensuke Inage's soundtrack is kind of interesting. I've said this in my Silent Hill 2 2001 video, and I'll say it again here. Silent Hill soundtracks have always been weird to me. Personally, I believe the best horror soundtracks enhance the tension and atmosphere. Subtle, ambient atmospheric tracks or absolute silence can be especially powerful in horror games. Even though this is my personal preference, Silent Hill consistently has chosen a different route. Excluding Silent Hill 1 soundtrack, 2 and 3 features a more low-key alternate rock and piano with a handful of unsettling tracks. Of the horror games I've played, Silent Hill soundtracks are the only ones that I found myself writing, cooking, or just casually listening to. Sure, they can carry some emotional weight and take me back to my first playthrough, but it's really just great music in general, and following series tradition, Yamaoka and Inage took Silent Hill F's soundtrack in a new direction entirely. To harmonize with the rural 20th century Japan setting, the composers leveraged many classic Japanese instruments like the shamisen, hyoshigi, and the shakuhachi to name a few, and we'd be here all day if I named them all. If you've been exposed to any Japanese media, you've heard these instruments before. When combining this soundtrack with how characters are dressed, reading about how spiritual the citizens are, the abundant Shinto Buddhist shrines, and civilians' functional role in society, Silent Hill F is trying to evoke a more traditional Japanese feel, and I believe it succeeds with flying colors. The shift in direction I was alluding to earlier was how the soundtrack is only great within the context of the game. After beating this game several times and listening to all the tracks, I haven't felt the need to listen to any of them individually. Although special in its own right, Silent Hill F is much closer to a traditional horror game soundtrack than a contemporary Silent Hill soundtrack, which is sort of ironic. Like I said earlier, it achieves what it sets out to do, but I never felt the need to listen to the soundtrack by itself either. This soundtrack, especially compared to the rest of Team Silent's games, is mysteriously short however. According to the bonus content that came with the pre-order, Silent Hill F's soundtrack has a total of 15 tracks. The reason this OST probably feels so small is because Silent Hill 2 2001 and 3's OSTs have around 30 tracks each. The soundtrack really isn't bad though, I'm just curious why it's so small compared to the others. Much of the emotional weight elicited from these soundtracks comes from hearing them during specific cutscenes. A bigger soundtrack means a higher chance of associating tracks with specific scenes, which would have gone a far way in my opinion. I'm curious how everyone feels about F's soundtrack though. I know it's probably not going to be everyone's favorite, but I am really curious what you all have to say. Before moving on to the gameplay, this is a UE5 game, so let's talk about some issues. To the surprise of probably everyone, the performance is solid. I didn't encounter any crashes or any major problems. All I had were some minor stutters towards the second half of the game, and a ghosting issue on Hanako after enabling FSR 3. It's getting harder and harder to gauge whether it's time to upgrade my computer. 2025 Silent Hill F was a shockingly stable release, whereas 2024's Silent Hill 2 and 2023's Alan Wake 2 brought my system to its knees. Performance feels like a coin toss nowadays, and Silent Hill F ran well, all things considered. And yes, we unfortunately have to celebrate this in 2025. I know it's probably weird to have video game performance in the presentation section, but I strongly believe performance is part of the immersion. Crashes, rough performance, stuttering, and other issues are obviously annoying and in many circumstances unacceptable for full-price games. The biggest issue I have with poor stability is how a crash can take you out of the experience. When a game abruptly crashes, our sense of immersion is completely gone. Rather than deciding when to join or leave, we're ripped out of the experience. Crashes also, and probably most importantly, remove us from the gameplay, which can be even more detrimental. Then again, I'm sure this may not be as upsetting to some as others. The gameplay of Silent Hill F has been justifiably criticized for a myriad of reasons, so let's take it from the top. The name of the game this time around is exploration, puzzle solving, inventory management, and combat. Lots and lots of combat. Exploration in Silent Hill F finds Hanako searching Ebisugaoka for resources to survive, and survival horror fans will feel right at home here. Weapons, healing, memos, and more will help Hanako survive her hellish trip through Ebisugaoka. As usual, I highly suggest soaking in the atmosphere and thoroughly exploring these areas. You probably think I'm recommending this mostly for the items, but memos, journals, and notes are really important in this game. These documents provide context for Ebisugaoka's civilians, their spiritual beliefs, cultural values, context for the cast, and integral lore to the narrative. In my mind, there are two types of Silent Hill F players. Players who watch the cutscenes and players who watch the cutscenes and read the documents. I can't stress just how important reading everything in this game is. You'll miss out on a ton of world building, and character renovations won't make any sense if you don't read these. This is problematic overall, but we'll put a pin in this for now. Anyways, you'll know what to expect if you played a survival horror game before. Limited inventory space, mental gymnastics before picking an item up, puzzle solving, and the works. Where Silent Hill F spices things up are the lack of chests to hoard items, the faith system, and the upgrade tree. As I played this game, there were several times I came across items I couldn't pick up because my inventory was full. Instead of dropping an item or storing it in the chest, you're forced to use or exchange it for faith at one of the save points. Honestly, I'm a bit conflicted with this game's inventory management. On one hand, I understand why it's designed this way. Before picking up or using an item, players must assess whether it's worth using eventually or exchanging it for faith to invest in Hanako. Faith is this commodity used to increase your health, stamina, or focus. Before upgrading Hanako's inventory space on New Game Plus, I loved the tough decisions the game presented me with. On the flip side, the ability to drop or store items would have been a great addition to the game. There were countless times where I just used an item because I found something more valuable. Introducing more options and variables only improves your survival horror foundation, in my opinion. The other cumbersome issue with the inventory system is how we're constantly forced to reassign items. Instead of picking up an item and it's automatically macroed to a button, you have to manually assign it each time you pick up a new one. And between managing the 3 bars, numerous weapons, and weapon durability, you'll be drowning in items before you know it. Scaling back on the volume of items or providing a third row of equipped items may resolve this issue. It's annoying, but it's not the end of the world either. The decision between using an item or converting it to faith was great nonetheless. In addition to your health, stamina, and focus bars, Hanako can upgrade the number of omomoris she can carry. Omomoris can be found throughout the world or purchased at save points. They provide gameplay changes that players can tailor towards their playstyle. Do you want more health, a larger perfect dodge window, or something else entirely? There's an omomori for you. I'd say these can provide a lot of replay value, but you'll probably find a preferred way to play the game and stick with it on New Game Plus. The faith system and how items function within these constraints is one of the strongest parts of the game. I don't know about y'all, but I usually just stockpile resources when I'm revisiting survival horror games. Knowing where enemies are placed, where bosses are, and how the AI functions transforms how we approach these games. The sanity system, the flower bar above your health bar, was genuinely fun for me. After learning how combat works and gathering more omomoris, I realized I don't care much about sanity since I'm not getting hit much and focus my inventory on healing items instead. The rest of the items I found were converted to omomori and omomori slots. This snowballed into getting more health with each successful critical attack and focus attacks charging faster. The omomori and faith choices provides mechanical freedom more akin to an RPG than a horror game. It's a unique approach that's a lot of fun on your first run. This obviously erodes during New Game Plus since Hanako's stats carry over, but it's fun the first time, which is an adjective I can't use when describing the combat. Silent Hill F's combat is best described as slow and weighty. It feels really slow and sometimes even bad on your first playthrough. There's a lot going on mechanically, but it's pretty straightforward after learning the rhythm, if you want to call it that. Basically, you have a lock-on, dodge, light, and heavy attack, and most of your weapons will degrade over time, which can be seen through the moon icon near your health bar. We can repair weapons with toolkits or procure one of the weapons littered throughout the environment. Above your health bar is your sanity meter, allowing Hanako to focus. When focused, a circle will begin to draw around the moon, indicating when you can perform a focused attack dealing extra damage. Focus is incredibly helpful when countering enemies. Each enemy in the game has one or a handful of attacks that can be countered. When you see this animation, pressing the heavy attack will cause Hanako to counter. Counters deal a ton of damage and may stun enemies, leaving them open to additional attacks. The tricky part with counters are how small their windows are. If you're looking for them or know they're coming after a string of attacks, they're easy to do. When Hanako's focused, however, these counter windows become much larger. And lastly, you have a perfect dodge because why not, I guess. Perfect dodging is what you'd expect. Dodge right before an attack lands and the game will slow down. Perfect dodging replenishes your stamina and leaves enemies open to being attacked. I know that probably sounded like a lot, but it's actually pretty straightforward once you get the feel for it. The reason the combat feels so weighty is because of how slow Hanako recovers from whiffed attacks, enemies' erratic attacks, the lengthy stamina recovery time, how spongy enemies can feel, and how much stamina it costs to dodge. All these elements, regardless of your weapon type, drastically slows the pace of combat. You also don't want to get hit too much since everything in this game hurts. Then again, I played on hard, so maybe that explains why enemies hit like this and felt so spongy. As alluded to earlier, Silent Hill F's combat has 3 critical issues: the enemy variety, something I like to call the perfect counter paradox, and the numerous forced combat sections. Before criticizing the enemies, I enjoy fighting most of them and I like their designs, but there's just not enough variety to last the entire runtime. You'll be fighting the same mannequins from the opening hours to the closing hours. By the time you reach the halfway point of the game, you'll have seen like 90% of the enemies. Enemy variety isn't just important for visuals and aesthetics, it plays a functional role in combat as well. New enemies force players to formulate new strategies and learn new counter windows. Yet, the same strategies you've used at the beginning of the game will be helpful at the end of the game. More enemies would have alleviated this issue and helped with the game's runtime as well. Another issue with the combat system are how counters interact with focus. When I first started this game, I was dying left and right and thought Hanako didn't deal enough damage. When thinking of ways to deal more damage, I remembered focus attacks were in the game, so I just started using them more often. Eventually, I realized these counter windows are enormous when Hanako's focused, so I just started spamming focus all the time. Focus is meant to be kept in check with your sanity gauge. The problem is there's very little reason not to just play like this. When Hanako's focused, her sanity gauge will gradually drain. When hidden focus or with psychological attacks, her sanity will drop. And when using sanity without getting hit, it'll restore on its own. And because there's like 5 or 6 enemies in the game, you're quickly going to learn when those counter windows are, how to avoid enemy attacks, and find yourself just hanging out in focus all the time. Between slowing down the counter window, grinding focus attacks, and not costing anything if you aren't hit, focus is a comedically strong mechanic. And the funny part is you'll probably stop using it since counters become easier and easier to land as you play the game due to the small enemy pool. By the time I started going for all the endings, I all but stopped using focus outside of certain enemies and bosses. And before you know it, combat evolves to waiting in focus, using a counter attack, running around while your sanity replenishes, and repeat the process. And if this doesn't get old quickly, the sheer volume of enemy encounters certainly will. As Hanako approaches the Shimizu residence towards the end of the game, we're bombarded with forced combat sections. Like, there's enough weapons and supplies to get us through these, but what happened here? The game goes from being mysterious, moody, and unsettling to this battle-heavy gauntlet. As we've discussed, it doesn't help that the combat isn't good enough to carry these sections either. These areas quickly overstayed their welcome and had me question whether I was still playing a Silent Hill game. They caused the game to drag, remove us from the horror atmosphere, and feel at odds with the game and story they're trying to convey. In the past, I've targeted many of these criticisms towards boss battles, but Silent Hill F's bosses, unironically, are one of the highlights of the game. I've been a vocal critic of boss battles in horror and survival horror games since I've started doing this YouTube channel. Boss battles are fine in a vacuum, but it's frustrating when they're forced into games they don't belong in, like survival horror games. They feel like a forced element of 80s game design that developers are scared to move on from. Survival horror is a design philosophy rooted in confronting players with difficult choices. Doing something as simple as looking at your inventory can be tense. So what happens when you muster up your resources to fight a boss? You get these contrived encounters with a focus on draining your resources, creating the illusion of scarcity. Additionally, most survival horror bosses don't have dense enough mechanics to house any interesting battles. Now, don't get it twisted, I'm not saying there needs to be several mechanics to master or even a huge skill ceiling, but when your system is as mechanically shallow as most survival horror games, boss battles evolve into the running in circles and dumping ammo maneuver. And despite these reservations, Silent Hill F, unironically, might have my favorite survival horror bosses. I wouldn't call Silent Hill F's gameplay outstanding, but counters, perfect dodging, and the plethora of enemy attacks make a lot of these fights memorable. Bosses, like the rest of the enemies, deal tons of damage, and they're definitely on the more challenging side, so keep an eye on what's hitting you, and you should be fine. They're a fun test throughout the game, and I didn't mind fighting them on New Game Plus. They have a more old school game design philosophy where you'll have to learn their attacks, weaknesses, and counter windows that I personally enjoyed. They, however, won't be for everyone, which eloquently brings us to the elephant in the room. After Silent Hill F's gameplay was revealed, journalists, media outlets, and some of the community referred to it as a Soulslike, and I believe this assessment is idiotic at best. Several months ago, I made a video called Stepping Out of From Software's Shadow, where I discussed what makes the Souls formula and how Lies of P pioneered its own identity within this established framework. Feel free to check out that video if you're interested in Souls or Lies of P. Originally, I was going to outline the Souls formula and where Silent Hill F misses the mark, but the latter should suffice. Other than a stamina bar, dodge, and heavy and light attacks, there's little to no resemblance to the Souls formula. Concluding that games with these elements are Souls-like is a bit of an overgeneralization in my opinion. Silent Hill F doesn't incorporate a ton of looping level design, there's no soul economy, there's nowhere near enough weapons, you can't upgrade them, there's no scaling system, adding a skill tree doesn't make your game an RPG, there's no wait system, and you don't drop your faith each time you die. If Silent Hill F incorporated any of these mechanics, had a unique spin on them, or leveraged more RPG mechanics, the Souls-like moniker or comparison may have some merit, but as it stands, I just think it's stupid. As an aside, it actually bothers me how adding any friction to your game, challenging bosses, a lock-on, and dodging has people rushing to put the Souls label on it. Many of the elements the Souls formula coalesced have been part of the medium for decades. All that I know is the Souls formula and even Souls-likes are starting to feel like buzzwords people use to garner interest. If we can agree arena fighters aren't traditional fighting games, we can agree that all challenging third-person action games aren't Souls or even Souls-likes. All in all, Silent Hill F's combat is serviceable. The gameplay being okay is oddly reminiscent of Team Silent's games. Their games have always been more focused on environmental storytelling, a gripping atmosphere, outstanding soundtracks, and engaging character narratives. I don't think it's controversial to say that games like Resident Evil have always had far superior gameplay. I think removing some of these forced combat sections, including more optional areas to explore like the doctor's house in the beginning, and reducing enemy health would go a far way in improving the core gameplay foundation. And if you've played a lot of third-person action games, you're probably going to be numb to the bad camera here as well. The camera gets caught on geometry and has the problems that you would expect out of a third-person game. I just stopped locking onto enemies after a while if you couldn't tell. Ultimately, the foundation, like I said, is serviceable, but I think some tweaks like reworking how focus and sanity function would go a far way in improving the core experience. And despite all these reservations, my blisteringly hot take is Silent Hill F probably has the best Silent Hill gameplay. Now don't get me wrong, there are tons of issues as we've discussed throughout this video, but other than Silent Hill 1, this is the first Silent Hill game that I decided to get all the endings in, and I don't think that's a coincidence. Sure, you can blame it on the mystery, writing, themes, and some video deadlines that I put on myself, but the gameplay issues began to erode after my second playthrough. You can call this Stockholm Syndrome if you want though. New Game Plus is also easier since you'll have more weapons, all your omamori, and foresight of future enemies. Future runs were nowhere near as problematic as my original run, but I don't want to ignore my initial impressions either. Hopefully this back and forth illustrates how divisive the gameplay is to me. I guess it's another Silent Hill game at the end of the day though. The story and characters are interesting while the gameplay is still problematic. And following this classic Silent Hill trend, Silent Hill F has a story and themes you absolutely shouldn't miss. Before getting into the story, I want to take a step back and remind everyone to savor their first experience. If I were to ask you how many games you were genuinely excited to play this year, you could probably list them on one hand. Video games today are crazy expensive and take a lot of time to develop. Gone are the days we get several projects from our favorite studios in the same generation. We really need to savor these experiences now more than ever before. If I wasn't playing games with the intent of making videos and played them like I was a kid or, before I had this channel, I'd probably take my time and pace myself with this game. You'll get more out of a game if you play an hour or two a day than 4 or 6 hours in one sitting, and this principle applies to TV shows that come out as well. The excitement, anticipation, and theorizing what happens next is rarer today than it was 20 years ago. It's easier said than done, but I'd highly recommend trying to pace yourself next time something you're interested in drops. Who knows, it might even have more staying power with you next time. Trust me, it's better to leave rushing through games to your favorite content creators than risk burning yourself out. And before getting into the story, which is going to take a while if my outline's anything to go off of, these videos take a lot of time and effort, and I'd really appreciate if you consider leaving a like, subscribing, or using your hype points if you're enjoying the video. Thanks for your support, and back to the video. Alright, let's finally get into why you're all here. One of the reasons this video took so long to make was because I wanted to let the narrative just kind of resonate with me. Getting all the endings and piecing together the story and themes took a while as well. The narrative had garnered a lot of hype when Hideyuki 07 was announced as a member of the development staff. As a friendly reminder, I haven't experienced any of his past works, but after completing Silent Hill F in its entirety, I get it. Kind of. From the beginning to the end, I was completely enthralled in Silent Hill F's story. I genuinely had a hard time putting the controller down because I was so invested in the world and characters. I rarely found myself bored as mysteries and revelations continued to unfold. I wanted to see Junko's face. Why was there so much space between Hanako and the rest of her family in this picture? Why does Sakuko call us a traitor? What are these pills that she's taking? What's this fog monster? Where the hell is this? What are my friends hiding? And who are you? Kept me hooked. Instead of relying on lengthy dialogue to provide answers, your journal is updated with tons of notes, and the environment foreshadows what's to come. And when there is dialogue, players are provided with some of the best voice acting I've heard in a very long time. If you don't mind reading subtitles, I can't recommend playing the game in Japanese enough. You don't need to speak Japanese to know when you're listening to something special. Gato Konatsu's performance left me speechless. We can hear her hate, anger, uncertainty, and eventual peace in her voice. She clearly gave her all to bring Hanako to life as she, and I quote, almost felt my own sanity slipping. A week or two after the game was released, she did an interview with Famitsu where she explained how psychologically taxing the recording process was and her difficulty in separating herself from Hanako. She would abruptly break down into tears, questioning her own mental well-being during the recording process. Playing Hanako, a character who's constantly questioning whether she's experiencing reality, certainly left her mark on her. I sincerely hope Konatsu took a break or got some help, is what I'd be saying if she wasn't streaming the game as of writing this. While there are several moments that'll stick with me for a while, Hanako confronting her shadow is somewhere near the top. Konatsu's performance here is excellent. Each beating moment of this scene is psychologically disturbing. Your first time experiencing it is terrifying and reminds me of something Team Silent would have made. Hanako sounds like she's happy to murder herself, her parents, and her friends. She's hyperventilating during the scene, and the tone of her voice is constantly changing as she shares her thoughts. I've never done voice acting before, but I'd imagine these scenes where you voice two characters speaking to themselves is especially challenging. Scenes like these find Konatsu balancing the calm version of Hanako with Hanako's shadow who's about to crash out. This scene and the dialogue she has when returning to town are uncomfortable and masterfully narrated. Anyways, I'm sorry about this tangent. I just wanted to dedicate a few moments of this video to Konatsu's performance because it's really good. It's really good for lack of better words. As such, I highly recommend playing this game in Japanese if you can. Trust me, this is something that you absolutely should not miss. Something else that kept me hooked during my first playthrough was Ryukishi 07's masterful push and pull of sharing information. There's an almost effortless balance of sharing enough information for us to know what's going on while keeping us in the dark and allowing our minds to wander. I had so many theories and burning questions that made putting the controller down difficult, and even though there's a new writer at the helm, the story still feels like a Silent Hill game. In addition to tearing the community apart, Silent Hill F has proposed a new question. What is a Silent Hill game? And personally, I have no idea. Defining what makes Silent Hill is much harder than what makes a Souls game, but a Souls game. FromSoft is the progenitor of the Souls formula, so all we have to do is revisit where it started and find similarities between FromSoft and non-FromSoft games. Silent Hill doesn't have this luxury. Mechanically, the games, at least the ones that are remembered, aren't very special. They're fun to play, sure, but they aren't exactly bleeding edge on the gameplay front either. If I had to define what a Silent Hill game was, I'd probably say any character-driven narrative tackling psychologically uncomfortable themes. Our propensity to sympathize with these themes are inherently uncomfortable, and the game must challenge the main character's perception of reality. The horror must transcend traditional horror and seep into the psyche of who we are as people. Identity, preference, and their sense of self must be questioned. And I wholeheartedly believe Silent Hill F passes these criteria with flying colors. Is it a gameplay departure from the rest of the series? You bet. And does the gameplay have problems? Well, find me a game that doesn't. But is the essence of Silent Hill still present? Absolutely. The open-ended nature of events, personal interpretations, and ability for our minds to wander are still present. Anyways, for a community who's so quick to call everything homogenized, I think we all need to be a bit more tolerant of risks studios want to take with established IPs. With that said, however, longtime Silent Hill fans will almost certainly realize that Ryukishi 07's story is a bit more direct with his themes. We'll talk about specifics later, but I want to make it clear that even though I enjoyed the narrative, there are some problems, which, who would have guessed? One of the areas I really enjoyed was how NeoBards went about developing Sakuko, Rinko, and Shu in the Dark Shrine. In case you haven't played this game and are just watching, which, shout out to y'all for still being here, the Dark Shrine is essentially Silent Hill F's Otherworld. I'm not sure how people feel about the Dark Shrine, but I think it's a brilliant way to echo the themes of dealing with social pressure and preserving cultural values, which terrifies Hanako. As she progresses the Dark Shrine, she has to kill her friends. These areas are stuffed with gimmicks, enemies, puzzles, mini-bosses, and everyone's favorite, forced combat sections. The atmosphere in these areas are great as well. The environments encapsulate what the characters fear or mirror their perceptions on reality. They're also filled with memos, journals, and other documents providing context to the cast. In Sakuko's area, we find several letters from her mother describing her fear of the dark, difficulty with making friends, and how she believes Hanako is talking behind her back. There's even a letter about how she was bullied for making friends with animals instead of her classmates. Uragirimono is also written in blood throughout her area. As an aside, there are several signs that should have been translated or had subtitles if you get close to them. This sign, for example, reads Chichi ni manabi, haha o tetsudao, ebisugaoka fubo to sensei no kai. Or in English, study from your father and give your mother a hand, Ebisugaoka Parent-Teacher Association. These association signs can be found throughout the town and all say different things. Fun fact, the kanji for Ebisugaoka can be read as Inugami's Hill, so there's your obscure Silent Hill fact for the day. These signs really add to the atmosphere, and it shouldn't require someone studying Japanese to understand them. I know I'm a small channel and Konami probably won't see this video, but subtitles would have been greatly appreciated for everybody. After completing Sakuko's area, we head towards Rinko's. Other than being obsessive and possessive of Shu, Rinko pushes Hanako down some stairs as she escapes into the forest before reaching the school. Rinko's area in the Dark Shrine explores her unhealthy infatuation with Shu, jealousy of Hanako's relationship with him, superiority complex over her classmates, and criticizes Hanako for speaking like a boy earlier. Her personality and the role of reinforcing cultural norms and societal constructs remind me a lot of Junko. As Hanako drops Rinko closer to the lava, her envy and jealousy grows, and some of these scrap letters to Shu in Rinko's room are crazy. Flipping the light on her desk introduces these Shu posters in her room that gradually increases until they're literally everywhere. If you didn't notice Rinko's behavior towards Shu and haven't been reading the documents, this room speaks for itself. And this room, for example, is what I meant by the story being more direct with its themes to an extent. If you've been reading everything and watching how these characters interact with each other, her stalker-like fixation on Shu is already clear. But I'd be lying if I said this room wasn't one of my favorite moments from the game. Before reading notes, the haunting celluloid dolls, and seeing her room get flooded with hand-drawn pictures of Shu, her obsession is clear as day. After putting Rinko in the oven, we move on to Shu's area, which I found quite lacking when compared to Sakuko and Rinko's. When comparing Sakuko and Rinko's area with Shu's, a lot of individual expression is missing, but there may be a reason for this. Young kids and even late teens often have larger-than-life aspirations and/or insecurities. I definitely did when I was younger before adulting jaded me. These insecurities, dreams, and ambitions are on full display in the prior rooms. Shu's area is much smaller by comparison, which makes sense given his upbringing. The Iwais, aka Shu's family, are the local doctors prescribing medicine and providing medical services to the community. I'm sure his family pushed academia and science on him from a young age. He obviously still has a personality since he's into UFOs, comics, and other stuff, but his area being littered with medical cabinets and supplies aren't a coincidence either. I don't know, Shu's area just feels short, barren, and somewhat empty when compared to Sakuko and Rinko's area. Given Silent Hill F's heavy reliance on documents and other articles, this place also feels uncharacteristically empty. One of the biggest issues with Silent Hill F, or possibly Ryukishi 07's writing, is the reliance on documents to flesh out the narrative. Characters' motivations, fates, where they come from, their relevance, who they are, and the heart of Ebisugaoka can be found here. These documents have a comical level of importance. What separates video games from other mediums is their interactivity. If you don't look up character meanings or the identity of a certain Foxman online, you may find yourself booting up the game to read Hanako's journal or other documents. There are even rare Steam achievements for players who collect a certain number of documents. Even though I had a lot of fun piecing the story together and letting my mind wander, forcing players to stop and read won't resonate with everyone. Then again, visual novels exist, which are basically interactable books with art, music, and voice acting. This isn't a unique issue to Silent Hill F though. There are tons of other games bombarding us with lengthy documents fleshing out their worlds. So this is the part of the video I'd like to say removing players from the gameplay is hard, but Metal Gear Solid 2 was one of my favorite pieces of media ever, and I love Atlus's games, so I'll just shut up with my hypocrisy. If documents preserve their narrative significance for Silent Hill going forward, it may behoove them to take a page out of the Immersive Sim playbook. If you're curious what an Immersive Sim is, I've explored this design philosophy in depth in my Prey video, so feel free to check that out if you're curious. Ken Levine, BioShock's director, has said his favorite games rarely remove player control. He believes video games should be player-controlled experiences first, and stories should take full control of the medium. To preserve this control while still developing the world, BioShock, like other immersive sims, employs audio diaries for players to listen to as they play. This small change keeps players immersed in the world and prevents us from pausing everything to constantly read. The journal and all these documents are fine in a vacuum, but it'd be great if they were voiced so we can listen to them as we play the game. And voice acting contributes another layer of intimacy to these documents. The last problem is a massive nitpick, but collectibles should be moved from the journal to the document menu. I have no idea why they're here, and it kind of bothers me. It's probably a personal problem though. Another area that caught me off guard was Hanako's grotesque ritual. I've seen a lot of things in my life, but I audibly gasped here. These scenes with the unsettling music achieved a level of body horror I haven't experienced in a very long time. Listening to Hanako hyperventilate as she saws her arm off, and this shot that zooms in on her face before one of the maids peels it is tough to watch. These scenes also feel like a turning point in the game. Survival horror games are beloved for their oppressive mechanics and tough decision making. Throughout the game, you'll be thinking about what to pick up, if you have the means to fight, when to use something, when to convert it into faith, and so on. After this gruesome ceremony, we, and Hanako by extension, are no longer scared. We've been reborn as this powerful monster with new gameplay mechanics. Fox Hanako doesn't have to worry about weapon durability since she fights with her new arm. Enemies in the Dark Shrine are special. Prior to getting a new arm, enemies can come back to life if they aren't defeated in specific areas. With her new arm, however, she can soul siphon enemies, which prevents them from reviving and fills up her bestial form. Hanako's bestial form is a transformation that gives her a longer arm, boosts her damage, and replaces her HP, with this bar also serving as a timer for this form. I adored the ludonarrative implications of Hanako becoming stronger as she forfeits her sense of self to the mysterious fox mask. Leaning into her believed societal role provides her with power, whereas she's much weaker when standing alone. Fox Hanako's presence, dialogue, and actions have this uncomfortable sense of indulgence and assimilation to them. Hanako has endured what the world has thrown at her, was told to murder her friends, watch them die, and struggles with her identity as a result. After going through this ritual, however, these worries are gone as she gladly forfeits her own autonomy. This physical and metaphorical assimilation is rewarded with power and quells her insecurities. Although NeoBards did an excellent job communicating these themes through the gameplay, the actual gameplay itself is quite problematic. Evolving from an action survival horror combat system to something more reminiscent of a beat-em-up is a surefire way of losing some of the audience, and maybe hardcore Silent Hill fans. If you've been around the channel for a while, there's a good chance you've seen my video on Resident Evil 4. One of the reasons I'm not exactly crazy about this game is, and I know I'm going to get some pushback on this, I don't exactly subscribe to the concept of action horror. Long story short, it's essential for survival horror games to strike a balance between tough decisions, resource scarcity, and not tipping the scale too far in the player's favor. One of the reasons these games are so popular is because we enjoy the tension of feeling helpless. Lean too far towards helpless and you get a hide-and-seek horror game, and lean too far the other way and you get a bad action game. Survival horror resides in this impossible middle ground that feels surreal when properly executed. And Silent Hill F, especially when you're playing as Hanako, leans towards the action side of this. If this was the direction they envisioned, why not create more enemies? Why not introduce unique soul siphon abilities, add a suite of upgrades to Fox Hanako, add more combos, or anything? I wish they leaned further into this and added more mechanical depth. Other than the bestial form and removing weapon durability, the gameplay feels practically the same. I really believe that this was an enormous missed opportunity and probably frustrated players more than anything. Furthermore, this can be quite troublesome on New Game Plus. Honestly, I grew numb to Fox Hanako's gameplay on New Game Plus, but that doesn't mean you will if you decide to go for one of the new endings. On the topic of New Game Plus and additional endings, Silent Hill F made the confident decision to lock additional endings behind New Game Plus. If you are frustrated or exhausted by the Coming Home to Roost ending and are still here, New Game Plus, unfortunately, is the best way to play this game. New Game Plus provides a myriad of changes ranging from new cutscenes, additional character development, weapons, and you guessed it, more documents. NG Plus may remedy your problems if you were unsatisfied with the original's ending. However, expecting players to put 50 hours in a horror game like I did is kind of unrealistic. My recommendation to experience all the content and save you a lot of time is to not take any red capsules, get the Sacred Sword, and save when you reach around here. And you can easily get the UFO ending in like 2 or 3 hours in a fresh New Game Plus. Also, huge shout out to developers for providing the ending criteria. I know there's going to be someone in the comments writing, well, back in my day we had to find these on our own, but don't lie to me, we've all looked this stuff up in the past or watched it on YouTube. And yet, creating a story that opens up after your first playthrough remains incredibly ambitious. There's a level of confidence you must have to believe your story, and endings by extension, are good enough to warrant multiple playthroughs. This was an enormous gamble when so many things today are competing for our time, and just because I was enchanted with Silent Hill F's story doesn't make it any easier to ignore its faults. Asking or borderline demanding someone to replay your game means revisiting the inherently flawed combat system, the heavy reliance on late game encounters, and fighting these bosses all over again. Telling someone who's probably exhausted by the time the credits rolled, hey, the game starts after beating it, is a tremendously tough sell. First impressions matter, and if you aren't having fun the first time, then why would you expect someone to have fun the second time? But instead of listening to me, we can explore this through the Steam achievement data. The Coming Home to Roost ending has an achievement rate of 42.5%, while the other endings have an average completion rate of 9.6%. That's a generational drop-off. These numbers tell us most players who beat the game never came back. I know this is a lot of criticism for someone who's gotten all the endings and enjoyed the game enough to make this long video, but this achievement percentage is the direct byproduct of NeoBards' decision. They took a risky gamble and stood on business. And regardless of this dangerous approach, if you ever found yourself interested in the story, I highly suggest watching the New Game Plus cutscenes, reading the extra documents, and watching the endings online. I still believe the story, characters, and themes are interesting enough to warrant repeat playthroughs, but your mileage will vary. The Coming Home to Roost ending may throw you for a curveball if you haven't been reading the documents. The big twist is Hanako's been taking these red pills to deal with her headaches. She prescribed them to her before the game started, and she's been relying on them to deal with domestic issues and societal pressure. Her reliance on these pills quickly become an addiction, warping her perception of reality. After confronting Junko, Hanako's sister, at the shrine and the Shiramoku fight, Hanako escapes, jumping between the Dark Shrine and Ebisugoka. Although this was a great demonstration of Hanako's fading sanity, the attention to detail here is remarkable as well. As she begins her escape, red capsules are littered everywhere in her path. You can probably just call these a path to the exit or some yellow tape in games, but the psychological implications they have, in addition to Hanako having 99 of them, are terrifying. These sections, and especially as she approaches the final door, represent her cavalier use of them. I personally wouldn't be shocked if she casually used them when she didn't have any headaches either. Reveling in indulgence to ignore reality or doing anything to distract us from it are both uncomfortably relatable themes. In Hanako's case, they were therapeutic and an escape to deal with her trauma. One of the most brilliant things about this ending, and my personal favorite, is how it can only exist in the medium. The crux of this plot twist is tied to a video game mechanic. Taking so much as one red capsule locks you out of all the other endings. You, the player, must prevent Hanako from using them and steering her towards a more sustainable future. Furthermore, red capsules are the only healing items that restore your health, sanity, and become stronger with subsequent use. Integrating gameplay mechanics into your narrative elevates your game in my opinion. I briefly touched on this in my Persona 3 video as well. Anyways, this ending can come out of nowhere and leave you with more questions than answers. Was any of this real? How is Junko here, and was Hanako the killer the entire time may cross your mind. I remember sitting there when I was streaming the game thinking, well, now what? Until starting New Game Plus. After the Coming Home to Roost ending, I got the Fox's wedding ending, which was pretty uncomfortable. Rather than confronting Shiramuku, Hanako blames Fox Hinako for the death of her friends and family. During their fight, Fox Mask comes to Fox Hanako's side, imploring her to use an elixir. The elixir draws out a dark spirit, and Fox Mask quickly dissolves it before getting struck with a bat by Shu, and Fox Hanako protects him from getting hit. On his way out, Shu apologizes for being jealous and wonders why he can't be happy for his partner. Black mist floods the room as he transforms into a Tsukumogami and fights Hanako. During their fight, they reminisce about their past and how their relationship drove Hanako to be reborn before Shu is freed. Shu reveals Fox Mask was Kotoyuki the entire time and tells him to look after Hanako. Kotoyuki refers to Hinako as my Hanako and swears to take care of her before becoming friends. It's a small detail, but I can't help but notice how Hanako's head is bowed here. A bowed head indicates respect and permissibility. This is the behavior you'd expect from a maid, employee, or someone meant to stay in line. It's a deliberate gesture done to elicit respect. And as the title indicates, Kotoyuki and Hinako get married in this ending. And lastly, the post-credit scene finds Hanako's face screaming, "No, I'm scared, I don't want to be like my mother." This is the bad ending and easily the most unsatisfying compared to the other endings outside of the, UFO ending. Of all the endings that occur in this game, this might be the most frightening. We'll cover the themes in depth after the endings, but one of the most prevalent themes has to do with Hanako's identity as a woman in 1960s Japan. Her identity and coming to terms with it are front and center throughout the game. Learning how to handle her anxiety and persevering forward are big parts of her character development, and watching everything Hanako has been struggling for be taken away from her feels straight out of a nightmare. From the time we've spent with Hanako, we know getting married to Kotoyuki and falling in line are the opposite of what she wants. This ending makes all of her struggles and the entire game feel superfluous. Nothing has any meaning, and she falls into the same trap that her mother, sister, friends, and many other women have fallen into at the time. An ending that's a bit more optimistic, conversely, with a darker tone of course, is the Fox Whet Its Tail ending. Confident to live her life the way she wants, Hanako confronts Shiramuku until being stopped by Kotoyuki. In the middle of asking who she was, Shu jumps to Kotoyuki, causing him to transform into Shichibi, who wants to marry Hanako for her power. As an aside, these stages, not that you'll really notice them, are really pretty for some reason. Fighting in the water polluted with leaves under a cloudy sky with the Torii Gate in the distance is just a cool aesthetic. It's also symbolic of how wrapped this narrative is in culture, values, spirits, and folklore. It's quite the fitting place for Hanako to stand her ground. It feels like she has to confront these deeply rooted cultural values to move forward and be her own person. Getting back on topic, the moments in the fight when Kotoyuki and Hanako speak are great. Between reading about Kotoyuki's upbringing and listening to his belief that a man's love provides a woman's happiness, he gets a ton of development and serves as a reminder of what many believed or continue to believe in. Hanako rebuttals by pushing back against these traditions, telling him she'd rather find her own purpose. With Shichibi defeated, Shu and Hanako escape to Ebisugaoka. She thanks him for helping and says she wouldn't be brave enough to stand up to Shichibi alone. She replies by praising her courage with this ominous camera angle. I don't want to add context where there's not, but this shot is genuinely uncomfortable for some reason. It almost implies that there's some malicious intent behind Shu's actions. He definitely would have been jealous if we went through with the marriage and didn't escape with him though. Even though this is the good ending, there's an ominous unease to everyone's actions here. After Hanako thanks him, she tells Shu that he looks weird in a tie, and Shu tells her that she looks weird as well. And I'm super curious what everybody thinks here because I have no idea what the hell they're talking about. Maybe they're both hallucinating and trapped in the dark shrine, but I have no idea what's going on here, honestly. When thinking about this ending, I think it's much easier to accept than the Fox's wedding ending. Rather than arguing who's going to marry Hanako, Shu appears to be less possessive and more supportive of Hanako making her own decisions. It also helps that Shu isn't possessed by Shichibi and appears to have her best interest in mind. Their relationship, regardless of Shu's romantic feelings, felt more organic than her relationship with Kotoyuki. The issues with this ending began to arise when realizing how underdeveloped Shu is and how Hanako found her peace. Okay, underdeveloped might be a bit strong, but Shu's character and his relationship with Hanako for that matter is very interesting. There's a flashback in the Shimizu residence going over how they've met and how heavily Hanako relies on him for a lot of things. Whereas Hanako had a platonic relationship with Shu, Shu couldn't deny his feelings. Skip ahead a bit and she's asking Shu for his thoughts on Kotoyuki and the arranged marriage. And Shu is probably heartbroken hearing this. He tells her that he'll always be supportive, but this decision lies on her shoulders. They probably have the most interesting relationship in the game because there's so many angles to approach it. You can take the relationship at surface value, but I'm sure Shu was elated to help Hanako call off the wedding. When you have feelings for someone and get turned down, going back to normal is actually really hard. There's a level of emotional maturity Shu has on the surface, but he also serves as a therapist for Hanako as well. He listened to her problems, she asked him for advice, and even provided a medical solution. Suddenly, Hanako's relationship with him has drastically changed, and the Fox Whet Its Tail ending embodies this relationship perfectly. Even though Hanako approached the Dark Shrine with the intent of calling off the wedding, she needed Shu's help to see it through. Her inability to see this through on her own highlights the doubt in her heart. There's still some anxiety for her to confront before she can walk forward, and Shu, albeit subtly, is required for this. If Shu didn't show up there, who knows what would have happened, which is why Hanako thanks him for coming. A part of me really enjoys this ending, but the issue with the ending is Hanako's reliance on Shu. This ending also kind of feels like Hanako is choosing Shu over Kotoyuki, which again really doesn't help her character. Coming to grips with reality and making sense of things are pivotal for Hanako's development, and she doesn't reach this conclusion on her own because of Shu. And the Ebisugaoka and Silence ending beautifully captures this dissonance. Before criticizing this ending, I adore what this ending means for Hanako as a character. She's no longer torn between her perceived societal duties and familial obligations. She's come to peace with every part of herself and endeavors to do things her way moving forward. The biggest issue with this ending is Kotoyuki's character. In one of the rare moments where NeoBards is content with keeping us in the dark, it's up to players to piece together Kotayuki's lore, who his mother is, and why she acts as she does. All this information, in addition to who the Tsunekis are, can be found in, you guessed it, the documents. Knowing who Kotayuki and his mother are and how he was brought up are critical to understanding who he is as a person. And as much as I want to have a strong opinion here, I can't say for certain I've collected and read all the documents in the game. These potentially missing documents may have important context, so I just wanted to let everyone know before I, just start spewing propaganda. Also, I'm not married to any of these criticisms, and honestly, I'm a bit shaky on it, so I'd love to hear everyone's thoughts on Kotayuki in the comments as well. So, as you can probably tell, I am torn on Kotayuki and Hinako's relationship. Kotayuki was a bastard from the Tsuneki family. Hidetoshi Tsuneki slept with Sachie Fujitori, one of the Tsuneki's housemaids, who would eventually become Kotayuki's mother. Sachie was a strict mother to Kotayuki, stressing the importance of his lineage. He grew up sheltered until Hanako saved him from a fox that bit him. After settling the fox and before leaving, Kotayuki asked for the girl's name, who was, of course, Hanako. But thanks to a medical record, we learned about how this bite caused a mysterious shift in Kotayuki's personality. After leaving the doctor, I think this is around the time they started exchanging letters, which put the plot into motion. Most of the problems I have with this ending are tied to Kotayuki's characterization, or should I say lack thereof. After discovering Kotayuki was possessed by Shichibi for almost the entire game, Hanako seems uncharacteristically willing to pick up where they left off after he explores the world. If he's been possessed since they were kids, wouldn't it make sense to rebuild their relationship from scratch? The letters they've sent and the relationship they fostered was really between Shichibi and Hinako, thus leaving Kotayuki as a blank state. By the end of the game, and especially when he sends his final letter to Hinako, he feels like a total stranger. And because Silent Hill F never dove into how Kotayuki and Shichibi's personalities were balanced or even commingled, we just don't know who this Kotayuki person actually is. If he's a kind-hearted person with Hanako's best interest at heart, that's fine, but we can't make any assumptions, and he doesn't know anything about himself either. Then again, adding logic to people, emotions, and relationships are a very slippery slope. Many of us have rules that we're willing to overlook based on the relationship with said individual. I guess what I'm struggling with mostly is wrapping my mind around Hanako, someone who's afraid of being emotionally vulnerable, leaving the door open for, albeit a stranger. Beyond this issue, it's great seeing Hanako come to terms with her anxiety and seeing the two Hanakos exist in harmony. It's a decision she made on her own, and I'm proud of her. If you remove Kotayuki's lack of characterization, I think this ending and the message it carries is excellent and something more people need to hear. And if you thought this video couldn't get any longer, we still haven't discussed my favorite part of Silent Hill F, which are of course the themes. I've seen a lot of people label this narrative as a feminist allegory, but I think this is a pretty surface level take. It'd be like walking away from Metal Gear thinking, wow, did you know that war was bad? If I had to sum this game up in a sentence, I'd say Silent Hill F provides an exploration of Japanese cultures, the dangers of assimilation, and how culture we endeavor to preserve can create monsters. But let's start with the elephant in the room, Hanako's mental health and perception of reality. One of the recurring elements throughout the story is how Hanako's trauma impacts her. Her reliance on the red capsules isn't simply for headaches. They provide her with an escape and a way of coping with reality. They remove her ability to make choices and further suppress her autonomy, and her relationship with Shu and Kotayuki serves the same purpose. Rather than making decisions for herself or the future, she's relying on them. And the lingering anxiety in her subconscious manifests itself as the red crimson. It's ironic, isn't it? By removing herself from any decision-making opportunity, Hanako has effectively become her mother, whom she detests. And by ignoring reality, relying on a substance, or having others make decisions for her, she's forfeiting the very essence of who she is. All that's left is a husk who does what she's told instead of thinking for herself, and this is precisely why this moment is so terrifying. Many, if not all the scenes where Hanako confronts her shadow in her room ends with her face peeling, showing this dark void. Beyond her mask lies Hanako as she perceives herself, a soulless husk. And when realizing this, Shiromuku's face transforms into something terrifying. Her adamant rejection of freedom results in her becoming everything she's running from. Furthermore, repressing your emotions and ignoring your trauma risks altering your perception of reality. Unlike Silent Hill 2, where James is the only one who can see the monsters, the entire cast of Silent Hill F can see the red crimson. I do believe, however, that the red crimson is especially relevant to Hanako. The violent nature of the red crimson eerily echoes the controlling essence of these institutions around her. Her anxiety is largely bred through institutional oppression ancient, so interpreting red crimson as a metaphor for institutional control shouldn't be that far-fetched. Many of the cultural issues Hanako encounters are the byproduct of these systems. To understand these systems and the culture around them, we need to explore the famous Japanese collectivist idiom, derukui wa utareru, or in English, the nail that sticks out gets hammered. If you've ever studied Japanese or explored Japanese culture, this won't be your first time hearing this, and I believe this idiom beautifully encapsulates everything Silent Hill F represents. If you don't know what this idiom means, essentially it's telling you to fall in line and to not disturb the peace. It's a brief saying that stresses the importance of assimilating into the dominant culture and disincentivizes individuality. It's the ultimate collectivist idiom that many Japanese subscribe to. Over here, where freedom and individuality are held in high regard, Japan's collectivist values diametrically oppose our established cultural values. Many Japanese are content, at least on the surface, with forfeiting their individual interests for society to march on. The progenitor of these cultural values can be found in the harsh living conditions when Chinese colonizers moved to Japan and struggled to survive. Instead of dying, they worked together, started sharing food, spread harvesting techniques, and survived as a collective according to the Japanese Mind, Understanding Contemporary Japanese Culture by Roger J. Davies and Osamu Ukeno. And we can find remnants of these values today through honne and tatemai. Honne roughly translates to real intentions or true opinion, and tatemai roughly translates to forward-facing or facade. In reality, honne describes the speaker's true intentions, whereas tatemai represents their outward-facing persona. Japanese hospitality is one of the many things they're famous for, but what if I told you tatemai played a role in this? Sustaining harmony is ingrained in their culture. Everyone's well-being is prioritized above individual satisfaction, and if you think this concept is strange, many cultures exhibit similar traits. The best example can be found with interacting with people at work or online. Speaking with someone in person comes with a level of respect and unwritten social rules. Speaking online, however, feels like the Wild West. Most people say or write stuff online they'd never say or do in person. This dynamic is also present when interacting with coworkers, classmates, or people that we just don't know. And with this in mind, you can probably see where I'm going with Silent Hill F. As Hanako explores Ebisugaoka, the dominant culture is beaten into her. Whether it's a sign saying real men drink beer, reading letters from her father about the burden of fatherhood, or the horrific letters stating getting married is a woman's duty and the best thing she can do from her mother, much of Hanako's stress can be traced back to upholding these cultural norms. And while it may appear the Shimizu family have fallen in line on the surface, upon further inspection of these characters, they are slaves to their values. Sustaining and perpetuating cultural values are why these characters are broken in the first place. Kimie Shimizu, Hanako's mother, was the victim of domestic abuse. Much of her husband's rage started when his friend robbed him of his money. Kanta, Hanako's father, apologized to Kimie in private, but refused to apologize in front of Hanako and Junko for a very specific reason, but more on that in a second. Kimie also shares that Kanta was actually quiet and a shy person before losing his money. In one of the last scenes with Hanako, Kimie apologizes for bringing her into this nightmare and failing to protect her. If you haven't watched this scene, you should go and watch it. It's a really touching moment after everything Hanako's been through. Kimie, like the rest of the Shimizu family, was the victim of this culture. I'd imagine it was probably rare for women, or anyone for that matter, to discuss things at the time because it was perceived as their civic duty. We can infer from her behavior she might have had some insecurities as Hanako, but decided to fall in line because that's what society expected of her. Playing your part means conforming, and in order to conform, a part of you must die. And losing who you are as a person is terrifying. This sentiment of falling in line and playing your part would be inherited and further explored through Junko Kinuta. Junko may be the most emotionally ambiguous character in the game. Initially, she advocates for happiness through marriage, encourages Hanako to grow by killing her friends, and eventually implores her to create her own path based on the ending. Her characterization differs greatly based on which ending you get. Many of the endings find her championing tradition, being at odds with Hanako. I think Junko's most interesting dialogue comes with the Ebisugaoka in silence ending. While in Hanako's room, Junko reveals her marriage was arranged, says love is blind, maintaining a marriage is more relevant than one's individual happiness, and Hanako, as you'd expect, completely disagrees. She believes the propensity of choice is what's most important. She doesn't care what happiness means to everyone else if she can't choose her fate. Junko reluctantly agrees with her even though it sounds idealistic. She then says maybe things will change in another 100 years and hopes Hanako can achieve this freedom as she leaves the room. After watching this, a sense of pity should creep into your heart. As the scene progresses, she's clearly envious of Hanako and how strong of a person she is. Whereas Junko and Kimie allowed parts of themselves to erode as they grew older, Hanako defiantly stands in opposition. she's willing to place her individual joy over Japan's altruist status quo. Watching this culture destroy her family and seeing its impact on society has left its mark on Hanako. And if you thought women were the only ones impacted by this culture, Kanta Shimizu proves otherwise. Hanako's father comes off as an angry drunk when you first meet him. Screaming at family, drinking during the day, and taking out his frustration on others describes him best. This is our first and probably lasting impression of him, since the coming home to roost ending doesn't really develop him much. All this changes, however, during the, you guessed it, Ebisugokan silence ending. In the Shimizu residence, we find a letter from Shotaro, Kanta's brother, discussing Kimie's illness, his reservations with Kanta taking on more debt for a surgery that may not work, reminisces about their mother, and implores him to enjoy what time he has left with her. Later, he formally apologizes to Hanako for everything, and Hanako's shadow just isn't having it. And when he delivers the "a proper father should be feared by his children" line, it's absolutely heartbreaking. There's a lot to unpack with Kanta. First and foremost, learning Kimie was diagnosed with some disease is tragic and recontextualizes just how strong she as a person is. Choosing to explain Kanta's behavior and apologizing for not protecting Hanako and Junko says more about Kimie's character than she probably could. Kanta, however, has been carrying this burden and has experienced something similar with his mom. Combine that with his friend stealing his money, and it's clear why he's angry. He's vulnerable and doesn't want his daughters to know what's happening. Teaching Junko and Hanako to fear men alludes to how he and Shotaro probably grew up. Similar with hate, behavior is something that's instilled at a young age. I'm speculating here, but I wouldn't be shocked if Kanta and Shotaro lost their mother at a young age and his father became physically and emotionally abusive. Domestic abuse is one of those cyclical issues. This usually occurs at a young age. Children interpret this as normal behavior and perpetuate it wherever they go. Many of our problems as men stem back to our pride in our ideal vision of what manhood looks like. Throughout the history of mankind, a strong man is often defined by their ability to hide their problems, provide for their families, and deal with their personal issues in silence. Getting a therapist, talking to others, or having candid conversations about our mental well-being have long been taboo. Talking about our problems with somebody has somehow been labeled as an activity for women. Many of our issues as men are often prescribed with just be a man or just deal with it. Idioms like these, amongst many others, function as methods of navigating this stress. And this culture of manhood has resulted in domestic abuse and most men, frankly, being emotionally underdeveloped. The inability to express our issues, share our problems, and how burdened we are with social expectations have created a unique dilemma exclusive to us. We are somehow the oppressors and the oppressed. Even though many of us are hurting deep down, asking for help almost always results in just being told to deal with it. Idioms and words like these and refusing to address our trauma explains why Kanta, his father, and many fathers from the 20th century prior are emotionally broken and are still dealing with the long-lasting emotional ramifications to this day. Some of us have perpetuated a dangerous culture, and Kanta's story functions as a microcosm of these issues. If you accept the premise that Kanta's dad was a different person before his wife passed, then can't we assume that losing her caused him to change? Was his father a different man? Did he completely change? And if Kanta and Shotaro experienced this, I'm sure they ended up hating their father, but also learned from him what being a man was all about. They learned a proper father should be feared by his children and decided to pass this culture down to Hanako and Junko, both of which are broken as a result. And at the core of these issues lies an antiquated culture we're so willing to protect. While it may sound like I'm criticizing Japan and its culture, these issues aren't exclusive to them. This culture predates Japan's existence and will most likely persist for years to come. These cultural values and all their issues exist in many parts of the world. What makes Japan such an interesting outlier is how prevalent collectivism and assimilation are in their culture. There's something psychologically terrifying about building a culture where everyone suffers in silence for the greater good. Sweeping your individual problems under the rug for society to improve yields its own issues, and just so we're clear, I'm not championing what we have in the US or anywhere else for that matter. Each system, governance, or philosophy comes with their own shortcomings and/or logical fallacies. Trust me, I could easily make a video like this on the US as well. Even though Ryukishio 7 could have written this story to take place in North America, South America, one of the countries in Europe, or somewhere in Asia, I believe the setting of Japan, especially if you're aware of the cultural relevance, greatly exacerbates these themes. To get the most out of this story, the onus is on the players to understand Japan and their rich culture. And when you wrap your mind around this, Silent Hill F evolves into a cautionary nightmare about the monsters born in our culture. Rejecting this culture, ostracizing yourself from established beliefs, and questioning why things are the way they are makes Silent Hill F, despite its many issues, one of the most powerful coming-of-age stories I've experienced. As time passes, more video essays are released, there's more discussions, and the community picks this game apart. I actually think that this game will be remembered as a cult classic, or maybe even a classic one day for its themes alone. Then again, calling a IP like Silent Hill a cult classic is like kind of tough, but you know what I mean. My bold guess after a month or two of this game being released is it's going to be remembered fondly, even though it's going to have some blemishes, obviously. I mean, if people could overlook the issues with Team Silent and Bloober Team's games, shouldn't we expect the same for Silent Hill F? If you ask someone their thoughts on Silent Hill 2, they'll probably ignore the gameplay and praise the character, world, and themes. And if you ask someone for their thoughts on the remake, they'll probably praise the enhanced voice acting and alternate take on SH2's story in parallel with everything else. No one's going to criticize the combat, the increased size of dungeons, the wildly different tone of cutscenes, or the fact you have to beat the game once to unlock 5 other endings. And in the case of Silent Hill F, I don't see it being any different. If we can ignore other issues from other games and champion them and put them on a pedestal, why can't we do the same with Silent Hill F? As per series tradition, Silent Hill F struggles with its combat, and sure, I'd prefer for the story to be more minimal and open to player interpretation. Other than those issues and everything we've discussed to this point, I think Silent Hill F will be fondly cherished one day. It's a story that's rooted in freedom. It's a commentary on Japanese culture discussing whether preserving established norms are worth silently struggling for, and whether it's 2, 5, 10, 20, or 100 years from now, the story, characters, and themes will remain timeless. Hey, thanks for making it to the end of the video, and I really hope you enjoyed. Before we get into the outro, a big shout out to the domain dwellers for supporting all my creative endeavors over here. If you enjoyed the video, please consider supporting my efforts by becoming a channel member or subscribing on Twitch, where you'll receive early video access, a special Discord role, access to my scripts, outline, emotes, and more. And also feel free to join the Discord where we talk about, well, literally everything. Also, I stream on YouTube and Twitch, so feel free to follow me wherever, and if you'd like to catch any of the past live streams, you will be able to find all of them in the past live streams playlist. Now, oh my god, okay, so this video took so fucking long, and I apologize. Life has been insanely busy with just like life, people, just stuff I just have to do with adulting and stuff like that, but hopefully things are starting to calm down and I could lock back into making videos and, you know, just kind of keep going, doing over here. And I also wanted to just frankly and selfishly and honestly just take some time and let this game marinate, right? Like I said in the video, we don't get many games that we're really like super deeply passionate about. Like new stuff comes out all the time, but it's very rare that something that you're really excited for just drops and you want to savor every single moment of it and just kind of take your time, let it marinate, and not really rush out a video, because I don't know if I would have been able to rush out a video of this quality. So yeah, hopefully it was worth the wait. And hopefully if you guys were excited about the game, you also just let it marinate in your mind and talked about it with everybody. But I'm really curious where this game is going to be seen in the future. Like, I wish I could have a crystal ball and just look at where things are going. But yeah, I don't know. I'm also like kind of scared. I don't know if games really age as well as they did like 15 or 20 years ago, just because of like how often stuff comes out. It feels like we're constantly on the go, but that's a video for another day. So a few questions before we get out of here. So first and foremost, what did you think of Silent Hill F? How did you get into the series? Do you think this game will be remembered fondly in the future, or do you think it's going to age like milk? What are your biggest issues? What are your favorite moments? And would you be interested in NeoBards and Ryuki Shio 7 working on another Silent Hill game? And which is your favorite Silent Hill? Let's talk everything Silent Hill in the comments below. I'd love to talk about this game. I think it's far more interesting than a lot of people realize or have said. But now that I'm finally done with this video, because you guys know how I go, I don't really watch other people's videos. I kind of just make my own, and then I watch everybody else after, just so I have my own opinion and stuff on the topic. Yeah, I'm just super excited to see what everybody else has to say about this game. I know it got some negative review and some like negative reception, but I mean, that's fine. That's like every game, right? We're all entitled to our own opinions. Now, for the next video, I usually don't announce what I'm working on next, but I'm going to need a little bit of patience from everybody. Truthfully, I'm working on the Persona 4 video next. It was really requested in the P3 video, which has been doing pretty well lately, so thanks for watching that. I'm happy that you guys enjoyed. I'm probably going to stream too, just to, you know, not go crazy just writing and editing all day, because working on these video essays, like, I'm not going to lie to you, this probably took like 3 or 4 weeks of just work. So yeah, hopefully everything turned out well. Yeah, that's pretty much all I got. So just stay tuned for the Persona 4 video. I'm going to try to have it out before the end of the year, but no promises. I will do my best as always. But yeah, before I get out of here, thanks again for watching, everybody. Feel free to join the Discord if you want to talk. Be sure to like and subscribe and hype the video, whatever that new feature's about, if you're watching it early enough. And I will check in with y'all in the next one. Have a good one.